Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 2 of Introduction to Biblical Languages. Thank you all again for your active participation in the forums. Let's jump right into the lecture because, as you will note this week, the information is starting to get a little bit more graduate level as far as how much you're going to be looking at this week. So, just for a review, I've included this first page. This is just a quick summation of everything that you guys need to know about last week. 4 different kinds of nouns, 3 different kinds of adjectives, and 12 different verb tenses. Okay, so I want you to kind of keep these locked up in your brain, keep reinforcing that content. But we are going to move on this week to more nuanced things. So I'm just going to kind of go through this as quickly as I can to give you a primer as to what you will be looking at so you know what to look for. And the first place we are going to start with is prepositions. So here, if you're not familiar, you can click on this link that I've included here, which will give you an exhaustive list of prepositions, but I'm not really interested in you memorizing every English preposition. Please don't do that. Here are some common ones that I've included. The basic idea, and I introduced this a bit last week, is that you just need to know kind of the 2 different ways that prepositions are used, both positionally and conceptually. Okay, so the woman is on the box, the turkey is in the cage, tells you positionally where these 2 subjects are in relationship to another object, right? So the woman in relation to the box, the turkey in relation to the cage. Whereas the bottom 2 examples, the book is about construction. Jesus died for us, tells us nothing about the position of the subjects to the object, but rather the conceptual relationship between the 2 things, okay? This tells you what, in fact, the book is about, the contents it contains, whereas the Jesus died for us gives you a sense of how Jesus relates to the us in relationship with the verb died. So it's more conceptual, not more conceptual, it is conceptual as opposed to positional. And here are some examples. So this is something you're going to need to be doing in your homework, is identifying the different prepositions you see. All right, adverbs. This is something that we have colloquially destroyed in the English language, which is fine. I'm not actually a stickler for grammar in speech. I think if you can get your meaning across, I'm fine with it. But technically, we often misuse adjectives as adverbs. The most common example that you probably hear is using good instead of well. Hey, how you doing? I'm doing good. Oh, you're doing good things? Like that's what you're doing? No, that's not what you mean. You mean that you are doing well. The basic definition of an adverb is it tells you the manner in which you are accomplishing the activity of the verb. So I am doing well means that the manner in which I am doing is well, rather than I am doing, I'm somehow acting on the idea of well, rather this is the manner in which I'm completing the action of the verb. Some other examples: the dog ran. How did he run? He ran quickly down the street. The man twirled. How? Beautifully through the air. The turtle marched. How did he march? Slowly across the grass. So this gives you a sense of how the action is being completed. The easiest way to identify them usually is the ly at the end of the word. My son is, as I mentioned, 2 years old, and he watches a lot of Thomas the Train, and one of the examples that I try to point out to him so he knows what an adverb is when Thomas says, I feel terrible. I say, oh yeah, what did terrible feel like? As though you're feeling some object that you call terrible. What he means to say is, I feel terribly. That is the manner in which I am feeling right now. So there you go, if that's helpful. Okay, let's move on to conjunctions and particles. I hate to say this, but it's probably the best thing you can do is if you're not sure what it is, in other words, if you've eliminated that it can't be a noun, it can't be an adjective, it can't be a preposition, it can't be an adverb, you may be probably looking at a conjunction or a particle, and they function, of course, in different ways. The most common way that we're used to seeing them is coordinating conjunctions, and there's a nice little acronym, fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. These are often coordinating conjunctions, and what that means is that they connect sentences, phrases, clauses, etc. Okay, correlating conjunctions are pairs. So both, and, rather than, either, or, as, such that, so on. Okay, so if you see these, you want to look for the others so you can identify them as a correlating conjunction. Either you are hot or cold. Running is not as relaxing as sleeping. Those are correlating conjunctions. All right. Particles / articles. These are parts of speech that are often just there in order to break up our semantic bantering. So they give us some direction in some ways, but they're mostly just formulas so that we can vocalize properly. So, for instance, we'll primarily just be working with articles in this class. There will be some particles, but don't worry too much about it. I'm more interested that you can identify our indefinite and definite articles. So our indefinite articles are a or a and an. So a dog, an office. Those are both designated as indefinite articles, and what that means is it's not specific as to what office or what dog you are talking about. It's just a dog in general or an office in general. Whereas if you wanted to speak specifically about an office that you are in, you might say the office. That would be a definite article. So, for instance, several kings were walking along a path. The kings sat on the side of the road. These are ways that we designate that we know where they actually are and who they actually are. They are definite. All right. That's going to become much more important in Greek. We tend to toss those around fairly liberally in English. Okay. Pronouns. So I promised that this would come. We've talked briefly about pronouns, namely personal pronouns like I, you, we, they, he, she, it. Now we are going to get into demonstrative and relative pronouns. Okay. This, that, these, those. We talked briefly about that in the homework, but this will give you a little bit more detail on how those function. For me, it's helpful to think of them primarily as adjectives because they function very much like adjectives. So they describe the noun that they're being attached to. These plums are sour. Which plums? These plums. So they're often conjoined to a noun to specify which of those sets of nouns that you're talking about. Those apples, these plums. And sometimes they stand alone as the subject of a sentence, in which case they function a lot like a substantive adjective. That was painful. All right. Relative pronouns, these are ones that we use all the time, and you can pay attention to your peers' speech to note when they're trying to use the word whom correctly versus who. It's always entertaining. If you don't know how to use it conceptually, you will often falter. So here you get to give it a shot. The relative pronoun is who, and when it's functioning as the subject of a verb, it's going to be who. The girl who jumped. The verb is jumped. The who is acting as the subject of that verb, and it will be referred to as a relative clause. So, for example, if you were to bracket off, I'm going to kind of demonstrate here, this little bit you would be left with a complete sentence. So don't read that little cordoned off piece. The girl helped the rest of the children cross without getting wet. Okay, that's a completely coherent sentence. But if you want to tell us a little bit more about that girl, you might say the girl. Which one? The one who jumped over the puddle. So the girl who jumped over the puddle helped the rest of the children cross without getting wet. Because who is functioning as the subject of that relative clause, it is who. If it were not the subject, it would have to be whom. So if you jump down to the bottom example, you will see this Spirit by whom you have been healed is the Spirit of God. So there, have been healed is the verb, and by whom is the indirect I don't know why I say an article. It's the indirect object of the sentence. And so it needs to be whom because it's not functioning as the subject of that clause. That's probably going to be confusing for you, but that is technically how the rule works. So there you go. The final thing I want to point out, and we have about 4 minutes before I hit my 15-minute limit for what I want you guys to have to watch of me talking, are the verb voices. So we use these all the time, but we're rarely aware of them. Every one of our 12 verb tenses can be modified into 3 different voices: active, middle, passive. The basic definition of each. An active voice is used when the subject is performing the action of the verb. The example I give you here, Batman threw the batarang at the Joker. Batman is the subject and he is doing the action. He is throwing in the past, simple past. So Batman threw. Okay. The middle voice is used when the subject of the verb is performing the action of the verb as well as receiving it. We often use the word himself, herself, itself, themselves, and so on to make this work. So, for example, while he was hypnotized, the man would hit himself. So the man is the subject of the sentence, and he is hitting himself. So hit himself is kind of the verb as a whole, and that in Greek would be the middle voice as it is in English. You are both doing and receiving the action as the subject. And the final one is the passive. Now, this is generally seen as poor grammar in English, but it happens a lot in Greek. In fact, you will see this in your word study that you practice on. Hint, hint. The basic definition, the subject is receiving the action of the verb. So, the football was kicked 60 yards by the expert punter. Okay, so here the football is the subject, was kicked is the verb, and you know it's passive because the subject, the football, is the thing that's being kicked. Okay, so if it said the expert punter kicked the football, then it would be active. But because you reversed the order of the sentence, you have to make that verb passive. All right. So now you're not only going to have to identify what the tense of the verb is, you're going to have to identify whether it's active, middle, or passive. So in this example, the football was kicked is a simple past passive verb. It's simple past because kicked. It's passive because of the insertion of the verb was. It can't be past continuous because it would have to then be was kicking, right? So you need to start paying attention really closely to those nuances in order to be able to identify and nuance these things. So this is going to raise a lot of questions. Practice on the homework, turn it in by Tuesday, and post it in the discussion forums so that we can have a nice, lively discussion around your answers. And make sure you also post some questions. I'm sure you will have them in the discussion forum for the lecture. Hope you all had a great week and are gearing up for another one to come. I will see you all in the forums. Bye.